So good morning again. And while you're in this kind of peaceful space, why don't you just go ahead and close your eyes and take 3 deep centering breaths. Really feeling that life force coming into you as you inhale. And as you exhale, let go of any strain or tension or worry, giving your mind a little vacation. Okay, you can open your eyes. That was our little mini meditation to start into our talk. So the last couple of times I've been here, I've actually been talking a little bit about the breath. And I wanted to just extend that a little bit more today and talk a little bit more about it. As we were driving across the Flint Hills this morning, I took a look out and I thought how it looked so barren, like everything is dead. But I realized that underneath the surface, and I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed some of my trees are already starting to bud out. And so underneath the surface of all that apparent barrenness, I know that there's life and potential teeming beneath of it. And so just like we say life was breathed into man and is breathed into beings, the same is happening continually out on the prairie or really everywhere all the time, even in places that appear empty and barren. And the same is true for us. Sometimes we go through these periods where we feel like we just don't have much life force in us, but actually beneath the surface there's lots of stuff brewing that's going to be coming to the surface. So I wanted to think more about this today, how all of the time there is this being with God and how that is really represented by the breath. How every time we breathe in, we're breathing in the presence of God, and every time we exhale, we're letting go of anything that's unnecessary, anything that might be blocking our way. And again, I wanted to look at this word inspiration. So it's inspiration and exhalation. And if you break it down, inspiration literally means the taking in of spirit. So each time we're breathing in spirit. And this passage from Psalms that says, "Be still and know that I am God," and how the breath allows us to do that. If we really focus on our breath, it brings us into this moment, allows us to have stillness and to recognize that God is both within us and all around us in every single moment. And that each moment is an opportunity, each breath is an opportunity for new life and new beginnings. So an opportunity to realize God's divinity within us each time we take a breath and each time we let go. Each time we surrender to that greater being that we are and the greater being that God is. So you can think of this breathing in as taking God in, as taking truth in, as taking life in. And when you do that, you're actually allowing God to breathe you. You're allowing life to breathe you. So we spend a lot of energy trying to exert our will upon life, which often leads to frustration more than anything else. And I'm as guilty of it as the next person is. But when we can really surrender to this greater divinity, powerful things start to happen, just like what's happening out there on the prairie that we can't yet see. So it's a really kind of a kind of trust. And when we exhale, that is the surrendering part. That's the letting go of all that unnecessary worry and fear and doubt that might be within us. So it's a really powerful thing if you think about it, just focusing on this inhalation and the exhalation and what that might represent. So I'm in the middle right now actually of, I just began yoga teacher training. And in yoga, as in most spiritual traditions around the world, the breath is a very important thing, and some of you might have heard about prana. So prana, and there's a whole branch of yoga called pranayama, which is breathing exercises. And so prana is said to be the life force that is carried in on the breath. It's not the breath itself, it's the life force that's carried in on the breath. And we can remember that when we think about breath being breathed into, life being breathed into beings. And so there's also, though, an opposing force called apana, which is the letting go of the breath. And both of those things are equally important to sustaining of life. So that's a part that we often don't think about. We think about taking in goodness, but we often don't allow for that letting go. And that was part of the point of having those songs in there about really surrendering to the divine, surrendering to our higher good. And I wanted to read again this passage from the Upanishads because I just haven't found something that speaks to this so beautifully. I am the breath of life, and I am the consciousness of man. Adore me and think of me as life and immortality. The breath of life is one. When we speak, life speaks. When we see, life sees. When we hear, life hears. When we think, life thinks. When we breathe, life breathes. That's a very, very powerful thought. So we looked briefly last time at the passage John 4:24, God is a spirit. And I wanted to focus on that a little bit more today and look at it a little bit more in its entirety. So this happened when Jesus was thirsty and stopped at a well and asked a Samaritan woman for water. And they ended up having this talk about, she was curious as to why he was interacting with her because she thought that wasn't normally what someone in his position would do. So they had this discussion, and he said, God is a spirit. So I was reading about this in this book, Lessons in Truth. Are you all familiar with this book? So very wonderful book by Emily Cady, who is one of the very first Unity writers. I think this was actually a collection of writings that was in a Unity publication at the end of the 1800s. So quite old, but very, very, still very alive and appropriate for today. And she said that actually, and sometimes you'll find that as in Bibles as not God is a spirit, but God is spirit, which she thought was a more appropriate translation because she said in this particular passage, he wasn't implying that there were multiple spirits, but that God is one spirit. And she points to the definition from Webster's Dictionary of spirit, which says, life or living substance considered independently of bodily existence, an intelligence conceived of apart from any physical organization or embodiment, vital essence, force, or energy as distinct from matter. So the very essence of what gives life to creativity. And this is what she has to say about this particular passage, God is spirit. God is spirit, or the creative energy that is the cause of all visible things. God as spirit is the invisible life and intelligence underlying all physical things. There could be no body or visible part to anything unless there were first spirit as creative cause. God is not a being or person having life, intelligence, love, power. God is that invisible, intangible, but very real something we call life. God is perfect love and infinite power. The total of these. The total of all good, whether manifested or unexpressed. God is spirit. We cannot see spirit with these fleshly eyes, but when spirit clothes itself with a body, when spirit makes itself visible or manifest through a material form, then we recognize it. You do not see the living, thinking me when you look at my body. You see only the form that I am manifesting. God then is the substance, and she likes to do what I like to do and break down words. So substance comes from sub, which means under, and stade, to stand. So it's the same as understand in a certain kind of way. Or the real thing standing under every visible form of life, love, intelligence, or power. Each rock, tree, animal, every visible thing is a manifestation of the one Spirit, God, differing only in degree of manifestation. And each of these numberless modes of manifestation or individualities, however insignificant, contains the whole. And then she talks about the ocean and how a drop of water from the ocean is just as perfectly whole and beautiful as the water from the whole ocean. But at the same time, this drop of water, or a pail of water, or a bucket full of water from the ocean, even though it's the same content, the same substance as the ocean, no one would mistake that one drop for the whole ocean in its entirety. So she says the same is true for all of us. Each of us is this substance of divinity, But just because we have that substance of divinity and are the same substance as divinity doesn't mean we are each and individually all of that being. None of us is God in its entirety, but we're the same substance. So she says, so we say that each individual manifestation of God contains the whole, not for a moment meaning that each individual is God in his entirety, but that each is God come forth in different quantity or degree. So I really loved that understanding of substance, that it's the thing that is under everything. And I wanted to point back to what we talked about, the Aramaic word for breath, which is ruha, or ruach in Hebrew. And that one word, if you remember, means spirit, wind, air, and breath. And when we translated to English, you know, not we ourselves, but when the Bible was translated to English, how one of those words was selected for each individual passage. So we lost a lot of the substance of the meaning. But it's important to remember that actually they're interchangeable. God is spirit is the same as God is breath. Holy Spirit, then, must also be holy breath. And when we recognize this connection and how the breath connects us to every living being, it becomes something extremely sacred and really represents sacred unity. So these separations that we tend to have in the West between spirit and body and humanity and nature start to appear very artificial. This is something that we've kind of imposed upon something that actually is very continuous and has a lot of fluidity and is actually only part of a greater whole. So when the Western Church started to develop the doctrine that Jesus was the salvation, at the same time, for whatever reason, nature was pushed out of the way. Prior to that, it was actually a place of devotion. And instead, in Western Christianity, nature and wilderness became areas of conflict rather than contemplation. But that was something that did not exist initially. And I've referred often to this book, The Hidden Gospel by Neil Douglas Clotes. And in this book, he talks about this and how, in fact, Jesus shared a very profound and symbolic worldview with the Jewish prophets before him that also had this reverence for nature and that used nature for contemplation. And so in the parables that Jesus used, he often referred to things that were very natural. And in this way, the way he used these stories, he evoked a really radical change of heart in his listeners. So he often spoke about the breath and breathing as revealing a kind of native wisdom that is actually kind of only being rediscovered today, the way he used these stories and used the breath to symbolize something much greater. So this statement that we were looking at, God is a spirit, or God is spirit, the full passage says, God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So once again, I looked to the Aramaic to kind of translate that for me. What does that really mean at a deeper level? So we've looked at the word spirit as a divine connection that's embodied in the breath. My breath is connected to the air that we all breathe, to the wind, to the atmosphere that circles the planet. So it's connecting me to all of creation and really creating this sacred unity. The word worship can mean to bow oneself or to surrender. So I like to think of this also as being embodied by that exhalation. That surrendering is a kind of worshiping something greater than me. I am allowing myself to let go, and in that way, I'm bowing to something that's a greater power than myself. And then the word truth, which is sharara in Aramaic, has some multiple meanings, all of which really shine some light on this passage. It can mean that which liberates and opens possibilities. So like in that field that appears barren, the truth will open possibilities and liberate those seeds to new life. It can mean that which is strong and vigorous, so something that's very alive. It can mean that which acts in keeping with universal harmony. So when we find ourselves in truth, that means we are in harmony with the divine. So the words that Klotz uses to kind of encompass all of this is that it actually points towards a sense of right direction at a particular time that enlivens one's personal purpose and at the same time harmonizes with all. So then he has this beautiful translation of that passage. They that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. I'm going to read it to you. This is how he translates that. Those who surrender to unity, bowing to it in utmost adoration, must do so in breath and harmony, like the sense of right direction that drives the universal winds. Isn't that beautiful? Those who surrender in unity, bowing to it in utmost adoration, must do so in breath and harmony, like the sense of right direction that drives the universal winds. So he says in a very expansive way, this statement unites us with all other breathing beings in a melody of unity. And I love that he uses the word unity. In a very practical, here and now way, it connects us to the most diverse voices of our inner and outer worlds, so that God that is within us and the God that is outside of us and in everyone else and in all of creation is connected with the breath. So in this way, the breath brings us into harmony so that we might know the truth. Know this thing that is going to liberate and open us to greater potential. That which is going to make us strong and vigorous. And that which is going to bring us into universal harmony. So I wanted to close today with this passage from this book, which I've not shared with you before, The Yoga of Sound. This author, Russell Paul, has a very interesting story. He is Indian, the son of Christian missionaries, and he is a musician. And so he was a young guy playing music and having a grand time, and then decided he wanted to be a monk and thought he was going to have to return to England. I think his parents were British and Indian, but British citizens. But he found a monastery there in India that incorporated Hindu practices. So it was an ashram monastery led by Bede Griffiths, who was a British monk. So very, very interesting story that he has. And I was exploring this book actually in preparation for a chanting workshop that I'm going to be doing at a yoga studio, but I found this great passage that was totally appropriate for today that I wanted to share with you, where he's talking about how the breath links body and spirit. The breath is a key element not only in Hindu yoga practice, but in any spiritual practice as shown in Buddhist meditation and Christian contemplative prayer. Why? Our breath is the most palpable link between the manifest reality of our physical existence and the unknown world of the spirit. When we observe the breath, we realize that it is not something we own, neither is it something we do. Rather, breathing is continually happening in us all the time. Each breath is a sign that the universe is giving us our existence at this moment. Through its contiguity, we are offered life in all its dimensions. Our breathing gives us the totality of the present moment as an eternal now, a place from which we can be conscious that each breath is different and new, a fresh affirmation that we are receiving the gift of life. The perspective that accompanies our breathing instills in us a sense of equality. We are not the only ones given life. That which breathes into us is, at this moment, breathing existence into every living being. The same breath has been breathed by every creature since the beginning of time, and the same breath will sustain life in all creatures yet to be born. In this sense, there is only one breath, one life for all. So as we go about our day and our week, let us remember the breath. Let us remember to allow breath and spirit to come into us in every moment, to bring us into harmony and to help us more fully embody that one breath that connects us all, the breath that is the spirit of life.